internet was just kind of coming up. We had a couple of tools that could help us, but mostly it was book-based. And the most popular book at the time was Arnold's, Bible for bodybuilding, the encyclopedia for bodybuilding. And everything in there was, 5x5, excessive loads, 85% or more of your one rep. And they kind of cycled a little bit here and there from recoveries, but most of the time it was just get strong. And so you're trying to do bodybuilding lifts while you're trying to be an explosive competitive athlete. And the two practices just don't match up. And I just didn't know any better at the time. So I've had to find my own way at a young age, what would normally happen to the 60, 70, 80-year-old. So I had a really unique situation between having my back blow apart and having back surgery to 9 months later finding out I had a carcinoid tumor in my lung, having lung cancer, having my lung taken out. 6 months later, finding another tumor in my thyroid, having my thyroid taken out. And then 4 years later, having arthroscopies on both of my hips. A year later, having both of my hips replaced. 2 days after my left one, having to dislocate 7 times in 24 hours, having a full revision on my left one, having a hernia repair, having carpal tunnel surgery, having a ligament in my thumb rupture and tear. These are all things that if you listed all of that, you'd go, that sounds like something that would happen to a 70 or an 80-year-old. Hip replacements, lung cancer and carpal tunnel surgeries. And this is typical for an older person, not somebody that's 26, 27, 28, 31. I had both my hips replaced at 36 years old. And it's like, I had a very unique experience. I don't look at any of that as a woe is me moment. It was an opportunity for me to learn. This happened for me, not to me. So if you're an older adult, you're over age 50 and you start heavier loaded lifting, and yeah, you have issues and potential injury risks and your discs are gonna get compacted, and these are all very common misconceptions. I'm not saying there's not a risk. You're gonna get hurt doing anything, and this is just gonna be in the implementation of resistance training should be done very progressively, and it should be done with somebody that knows resistance training properly and is able to coach you along the way. But the valued benefits of this are bone density response, muscularity response. These are all the quality of life increasers. Joe is just tossing around these kettlebells and his buddy's training with one. And it's like, you look at it and you're like, he's struggling. Joe's just cranking. And if you know those weights, like Joe's working with 2 71-pound kettlebells, one in each hand. And you're like, holy hell. Like that is really strong. We're starting to see further influences of fitness into the older ages. And people will look at that and they go, well, it's because he takes testosterone. You could take testosterone and put it into anybody and it's not going to make them look like that. You have got to do work. You have got to train. You've got to know how to train your body at that age to be able to maintain that type of muscle mass. I could shoot you up with HGH and whatever Barry Bonds was taking, like whatever anybody was taking, the best stuff. If you don't train, it's not going to do anything other than probably just make your body bloat. The development of Tiger Woods was a very big driver in adults seeing their kid go, man, he was a badass little expert kid on the, whatever it was, the Tonight Show or whatever, putting at 3 years old, hitting a ball 100 yards at 3 years old, and then becoming the successful athlete he was, where these parents went, we've got to specialize with our kids. And the coaches just followed suit. And the ones that were multi-sport athletes have been much more successful than those that had a specialty. And the ones that had specialties experienced injuries, even career-ending injuries earlier in their careers than the ones that were multi-sport athletes.
So I'm Sifu Slim, and today's podcast is about health for athletes and people who train. We could even mention people who don't train and the problems of being sedentary. So that's something that I spent quite a bit of time on. My first website ages ago in 2008 was maintenanceworkout.com. And you would think that something like that should have been snapped up already since the internet had been out since the early 90s, but I was amazed that it wasn't. So a lot of emphasis over the last few decades has been placed on transformational fitness, getting ripped, getting bigger, stronger, faster, all this transformation modality. Whereas I thought that it made sense to me, the Jack LaLanne approach to life, which was get fit and maintain fitness. You don't have to be excessive, which Jack LaLanne would admit that he was, 4 or 5 hours of workouts and pulling boats and feral on islands off of San Francisco on a paddleboard with sharks and this type of thing, and then winding down the day with a bottle or two of alcohol, wine, which was common for him. Not to besmirch him, but this highly intense type of person is not really a role model for the average person. Someone like me is kind of more of a role model, doesn't have a big physique, had a job that was a lot of sitting, a lot of computer time, a lot of screen time. And how do you make the changes that are necessary to provide what I call wellness? I'm not a big believer in longevity. I don't think you'd want to be around if you're disabled, or at least a lot of people wouldn't. Some people are okay with being disabled in a wheelchair and have that zest for life. I'm not sure that I would. I'm so interested in the physical that I'd want to be as productive as I could in mind, body, and spirit. So I'm Sifu Slim, author of The Aging Athlete, author of Sedentary Nation. Please take a moment, folks tuning in, to give us a thumbs up, and hope you learned something in this video. We've got Robert Linkul, and maybe you could introduce yourself, Robert.
Absolutely, Sifu. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. I'm Robert Linkul, and I'm the owner of trainingtheolderadult.com. I'm also the director of education for Fit Body Bootcamp, and work directly with the entire franchise, but specifically with their older adult program, Fit Body Forever. Went to school here in Sacramento, California, got a bachelor's degree in kinesiology, moved on to the University Sports Academy, and I got a master's degree in personal training. Worked with the NSCA for the last 15 years, served on their board of directors. I've done all kinds of good things in the industry over the last 24 years, and specifically work with older populations. In-house, we've got about 65 clients that I see on a weekly basis, and another 250 plus TOA coaches out there that we work with on a monthly basis, teaching them all how to work with the aging population.
Fantastic. So before we got into some of your specialties, as I'd mentioned, I'm hoping to ask you a little bit about weight-bearing activities and the health of the spine. So is that something we could tackle?
Absolutely.
All right, I'm going to play a video, and you'll just be able to hear the audio. And this is Dr. Grant Elliott with Rehab Fix. It's an online low back program, and he's a former wrestler, former cyclist, and a chiropractor who's got a platform. So this is a little bit from his podcast, and he's talking about weightlifting and does it compress the spine. And interestingly, a lot of the people that I've heard talk about the benefits of weight-bearing activity and even pretty substantial weight are young. And now that I'm 62 and I'm experiencing some things with the spine that I didn't know I had for a long time, I'm wondering what direction to go in for the next 10 to 30 years of my life. So let's listen to what this gentleman, Grant Elliott, has to say. You'll be able to hear the audio, hopefully, about the studies that are out on this specific subject.
At the initial starting point of the disc height between the individuals that had only been training one time, maximum of one time per week versus minimum of 4 times per week over the last 5 years, that their starting point in the morning for their disc heights were comparable. They were comparable. They also found that throughout the day, you would think, okay, if you go work out, if you go do some heavy squats, heavy deadlifts, that's going to compress your spine, right? That second MRI you take at the end of the day, man, that's probably going to be, evidence of that compression. It's probably going to show that compression. No, it did not. They found that the starting point for both groups were similar in regards to their disc height. So they had similar disc health. Disc health is categorized by essentially the amount of water in the disc and the proteoglycan content of the disc, the rate of gene expression, and cell apoptosis. Those are the main things that they use to look at disc health. But in this particular scenario, it was mainly the height, but all of those things essentially affect the height of the disc. So they found that the starting point of both groups, one who hardly trains one who trains a pretty decent amount. Starting point, similar. At the end of the day, after exercising versus not exercising, still similar, still comparable. Now, generally speaking, both groups lost disc height throughout the day. That's normal. Everybody knows this. Your discs will absorb water throughout the night, called imbibition. As you stand and gravity is loading you throughout the day, that fluid, that water slowly squeezes out. And then when you lay back down at night, it reabsorbs it, and it does that every single day. Okay, so in both groups, their discs got smaller throughout the day, which is normal. That happens to everybody. But the extent at which they got smaller, the ratio, so to speak, the ratio of the starting size versus the ending size, was comparable from the weightlifting group to the non-weightlifting group. So what does this tell us? Heavy weightlifting does not compress your spine. It does not compress your discs. For over 5 years, they were doing this, and they had similar starting point, similar ratios, similar amount of disc height lost, while one group is training hard and the other one is not. So let me ask you this. If the effect on your discs are the exact same, whether you're training basically not at all, 1 time a week, or at least 4 times a week, if the result is the same, if your disc health is the same, which one would you choose? The one that's going to make you healthier and stronger. Duh.
So there's an example of a study, and I haven't read this study, but I did look on PubMed, and I did find a study called The Effects of Dynamic Loading on the Intervertebral Disc. So I'm going to pass this over to Robert and see if he has any comments on what you were able to hear that last message, I guess.
Yeah, I'm familiar with the study, and it's unique in that it goes against everything that our common misconceptions as a society looks at in aging populations. If you're an older adult, you're over age 50, and you start heavier loaded lifting, and yeah, you have issues and potential injury risks, and your discs are going to get compacted, and these are all very common misconceptions. I'm not saying there's not a risk. You're going to get hurt doing anything, and this is just going to be in the implementation of resistance training should be done very progressively, and it should be done with somebody that knows resistance training properly and is able to coach you along the way. But the valued benefits of this are bone density response, muscularity response. These are all the quality of life increasers. If we're just looking at the disc itself in the lower back, from non-trained to trained, that in my opinion, that's a great thing to find out, is that any stresses and efforts we're going to put through this, when done so appropriately over a 5-year study, didn't do any disc damage to basically, that's going to break down that misconception of the aging pops that you're going to hurt yourself in terms of compacting your discs if you resistance train. The benefits you're going to reap from that are astronomical, and from across the board on anti-sarcopenic, anti-osteoporosis based, cardiovascular health, cognition, everything else. Those are where all the added benefits come in. But if you just look at the study and say, like, is it worth it to resistance train or not if it's going to be the same? You're not looking at all the benefits that come along with it. This is actually a good thing. It's showcasing your back can handle it.
What about the disc heights for weightlifters who've been competitive? So looking at breaking records and competing on Olympic teams and this type of thing from age, starting their training somewhere in their teens maybe and ending their careers in their 30s. What does it look like for these folks when they're in their 60s and 70s? Are they different than the standard population of non-competitive athletes?
Absolutely. They are, on average, not everybody, but on average, they are going to experience more compact disc degeneration issues just from the excessive, massive amounts of load they've manipulated. On the flip side of that, though, they are going to have much greater bone density than the average older adult. They're going to carry more muscle mass longer and later into their years than the average older adult will. So to every perk, right, or in every positive, there's going to be a negative to this. What they are going to sacrifice in disc height and disc quality by the amount of excessive loading they did earlier in their career is going to assist them later in life, assuming they are going to continue to do some form of varied, resistance training. The trouble with that excessive early loading is the damage that can be done. And now you're going to have to live with that. I'm a very good example of this. As a hammer thrower, Olympic weightlifter, I did a lot of competitive lifting at a very young age and was quite strong and quite capable for my size and my abilities. But I excessively overtrained myself into disc degeneration, eventually herniations and ruptures that required surgeries, discectomies to clean up my back and fix my back, ultimately ending my hammer throwing career because I overtrained that. So as with anything, excess and poor moderation to it, poor technique, improper progression. I didn't have a great coach that was guiding me along the ways, et cetera, to tell me, hey man, you're overtraining, we need more recovery days, all of this. I'm not a terribly talented athlete, so I'm like, I'm just gonna train my way into being competitive with these guys. And in doing that, accelerated my biological aging by 30 years. I'm 44 now, I've got the spine of a 80-year-old, 75, 80-year-old. And it's because of that excessive loading. But on the other side, my bone density is exceptional. My muscle mass that I've carried into my 40s is exceptional. I've continued to train that, but I set myself up earlier in life with that. When the average adult hears this, the goal is not to do Olympic lifting at that excessive level. That is for sport, for competition. You're doing 1 rep lifts, 1 attempt, your maximal load, your body's barely holding together when you attempt these lifts. That's not for us. We're talking 8 to 15 plus, really it's 6 to 30 reps is your hypertrophy range, as long as you're adjusting the load to meet that repetition somewhere in the 80 to 85% effort range. If you are doing that, you are going to build strong muscular binding sites. You're going to increase your bone density. In many cases, the Lift More studies and quite a few others showcased increases in posture from lordotic curving in the spine, forward head positionings improving, all this, all from simple basic resistance training. So it doesn't have to be to that extreme. For the average older adult who's 45, 50 years old, older, 2 to 3 days a week, 20 to 30 minutes, basic stuff will have a great return for you.
Thanks, Robert. So
Yeah.
did you, is your MRI currently showing stenosis or compressed discs or bulging discs?
Yes.
And what do you do for your weight training?
The belt squat has probably been the thing that has helped me the most. I was a 550 pound back squatter. I could pull close to 500 off the floor. I front squatted 440. I could clean and jerk 330. I could snatch 225. Like I had relatively respectable lifting loads for a dynamic hammer thrower of my time. And to be able to maintain that and keep lifting through those generational lifts, I had to continue to try to challenge and push myself in those. And all that did was, by continually seeking a heavier load, all it did was more damage to my body. If I could go back and kind of train it better now, I would have found a moderate heavy load and learned to move it really, really quickly. So kind of trying to take that mindset and bring it into my 40-year-old body. I still want to be dynamic. I still want to be explosive. I can't pull 300 pounds off the floor anymore. My body won't take it. So what can I do with a lower back that's really vulnerable? Belt squatting was the one that really helped me the most. Hooking the load around your waist, allowing the load to suspend from the iliac crest, the top of your butt cheeks, all the way around to the front of your hip. Like you'd see somebody doing loaded chin-ups or a bench dip, right? They're doing bar dips and they've got the weights dangling between their knees. Well, you do that and either hook it to a flywheel. That's a flywheel over here in the corner right there. That's a flywheel. You hook it to that, hook it to a kettlebell, any type of, what are they called? Bulldogs or whatnot, Rogue, all these other companies, they make belt squat machines now where Pit Shark, that's what it's called. Pit Shark was one of the first ones. Belt squat helps a ton because it reduces up to 90% of the vertical axing loaded pressure in your spine and places it around your hips. So I could still train my thighs, my quads, my glutes, my lower half with a moderate load, and I could still move it rather dynamically. When it comes to upper body stuff, pushing, pulling, bench press, rows, all that, I can still do all those things okay. It's the vertical compressing lifts that really get you. So I am not able to barbell backload anymore. Not that I would. I haven't barbell backloaded a client of mine in a very long time. As I say that, I just had my wife do box squats today with a barbell, and I said, man, when was the last time that we did this? She's trying to make her quads a little bit bigger, and she goes, I don't think since college. So I mean, it's been 20 years since we've back squatted anybody that wasn't competing in the sport of powerlifting, something like that. There are many other ways to do this, safer ways to do this, with hex bars, where you're in the center of the load rather than the bar resting on top of you, with belt squatting, even moderate load goblet squats where you're holding the weight in front of you, sitting down on a bench, standing back up. You can still produce a very good full body / lower body emphasis strength training component without a ton of load like I used to. I just don't have the spine damage being done, that I was doing unknowingly in my 20s, of all the dynamic heavy loads.
Was this late 90s, early 2000s?
I graduated in 99 from high school. I was probably 4 years into really, aggressive lifting at that point, all through high school. I had a great discus coach named Mike Louisiana. He was the 1981 NCAA discus champion, lived right down the street from me, and trained me in the weight room and got me coached up really well. And I had all the basics down. And when I went to college, I just didn't have the weight room coach anymore. The two schools that I went to at American River College and Sac State, they just didn't have a dedicated weight room coach to help us. So I was doing the best I could, but at the time, internet was just kind of coming up. We had a couple of tools that could help us, but mostly it was book based. And the most popular book at the time was Arnold's, Bible for Bodybuilding, the encyclopedia for bodybuilding. And everything in there was, 5x5, excessive loads, 85% or more of your one rep. And they kind of cycled a little bit here and there from recoveries, but most of the time it was just get strong. And so you're trying to do bodybuilding lifts while you're trying to be an explosive competitive athlete. And the two practices just don't match up. And I just didn't know any better at the time. So I did the best I could, but it was not appropriate. The value of that is learning the lessons of what I shouldn't do and the damage that it's done to my body, and finding ways to train myself with these injuries is what's made the experience of working with our older populations so much better. Is I've had to find my own way at a young age, what would normally happen to the 60, 70, 80-year-old. So I had a really unique situation between having my back blow apart and having back surgery, to 9 months later finding out I had a carcinoid tumor in my lung, having lung cancer, having my lung taken out. 6 months later finding another tumor in my thyroid, having my thyroid taken out. And then 4 years later having arthroscopies on both of my hips. A year later having both of my hips replaced. 2 days after my left one having to dislocate 7 times in 24 hours, having a full revision on my left one, having a hernia repair, having carpal tunnel surgery, having a ligament in my thumb rupture and tear. These are all things that if you listed all of that, you'd go, that sounds like something that would happen to a 70 or an 80-year-old. Hip replacements, lung cancer and carpal tunnel surgeries. And this is typical for an older person, not somebody that's 26, 27, 28, 31. I had both my hips replaced at 36 years old. And it's like, I had a very unique experience. I don't look at any of that as a woe is me moment. It was an opportunity for me to learn. This happened for me, not to me. And I've had a very unique experience through that time to be able to go, this is what the average 60, 70-year-old is going through. Let me try to change my programming to match this. And our people have had just significant improvements in quality of life and joint preservation and cognition and everything else because of it. So I feel honored, even though it was painful and uncomfortable and everything else, but so was life.
Gosh, what a story, Robert. Thanks for sharing that. And
Bet.
sorry you had to go through that.
No need.
Did you have a mind that could overcome obstacles at a young age, or did this help build that and develop that through that period?
Hi, this is Sifu Slim, author of The Aging Athlete. In this book, you're going to get to hear about 2 different groups of former high-performance athletes. One group, which is made up of 90% of the former athletes, does not do physical activity on a regular basis and tends to suffer the consequences of a sedentary lifestyle. The other group, which is made up of 10% of the former athletes, is doing physical activity on a regular basis and tends to thrive through the aging process, or at least has a better chance at coping with the aging process. We could have taken these folks to a lab and done all kinds of tests on them. Instead, we slowed them down and sat them down and asked them in their own words to describe why they're wired the way they are, so that we all, former athletes and non-athletes, can use some of their inspirational and motivational and mindset lessons in our own lives. I hope you pick up a copy today. You can go to theagingathlete.com. And when you have a chance to read it, I'd love to hear back from you to find out what your thoughts are on the stories of these aging athletes.
Number one, I have a extremely supportive, extremely loving wife who supported me with the exact same mindset that I had. And that is that at that point in life, my whole focus was, I want to be able to make her happy, and I want to be able to create a income that would allow us to live this great life. And after you have somebody look you in the eyes and tell you, I don't mean to be too dramatic, but to tell you that you have cancer, things really changed for me. And I went, whoa, man, maybe I don't need to spend so much time working. Maybe I need to spend a little more time focusing on what's in front of me. And things kind of toggled and they switched. And Keegan, my wife, met me there. And we were able to tackle these things with a comic mindset. We didn't take it too serious. We didn't take ourselves too serious. I was running around the hospital with my ass hanging out of the gown and, with things hanging off me and making fun with the nurses, and it was just too surreal. It was too serious of a moment for us to be that serious, because we're really not those people. And so with each thing that we tackled, my wife has had many health concerns. She's up in the double digits for surgery. She's had a double mastectomy and has had all kinds of other health concerns as well. And with every one of these that we tackle, we go into it with this fun, hilarity-based mindset of it could always be worse. And I get reminders of this almost every time. I was just at the hospital last week. I was there for a hearing test, and they wheeled a guy past me with no legs. And I swear to you that I had the exact same experience when I'm walking out of the hospital. I'm trying to hold myself together, trying not to cry, being told that I just had cancer. And they wheeled a guy past us that was just in a motorcycle accident, and his legs were gone. And we saw some just horrific things in this moment. And I said, I'm not crying about this. Like this, it could be way worse, right? And I think that's a mentality that's stuck with us for a long time, is that we just need to be able to tackle these things as they come. And what will happen happens. But we're both strong, well-minded people. I feel blessed that she and I found each other and have been able to support each other through these things. And we both have had a lot, but it all just kind of adds to our story and our experiences. It's been a beautiful life together to this point.
Wow, fascinating. I hope you're going to release, I don't know if you have time to put together a book about your story, but it sounds made for a TV documentary.
Thank you. I've never thought about that. We've done a couple of little webcasts and recorded some stories and some things. We did a little series called Stories from the IR, and it was like every time the injured reserve, every time we were down with an injury, we would come on camera and kind of talk about it together. And the experiences of really people getting their joint replacements or going through some of the mastectomy surgeries are the ones that have really kind of hit home with people. What do I do beforehand? What do I do after? What questions should I ask? That kind of stuff. So we have those on our YouTube, and that's definitely been one of the more referred tools that we've been able to send out to people to let them, be able to prepare for their events, their surgeries, their experiences as they come up. So that's been a really good story and a good part of this as well.
So, the question I have now is for people who already have things like stenosis, spondylolisthesis.
Between each of the movable vertebrae is located the intervertebral disc. Spondylolisthesis is a common lumbar spine problem when the disc is unstable and allows the upper vertebral body to slide forward.
other spine issues, degeneration. What are your thoughts on weight-bearing activities? And if they're done correctly and you're warmed up properly, good biomechanics, can those things stave off further degeneration? Can they do some positive things, or should they, the heavy weight bearing, should they be avoided?
Good question, Sifu. Yeah, so you nailed it. Number one, they've got to be taught in the right way to do this. And progressive load needs to be taken very serious, meaning it's got to start really light and it needs to progress according to, can you keep the technique? Can you maintain the tempo? Can you get the amount of reps that I've been asking for? And if we can do that, if you can keep really good technique, I want 8 reps and I want this tempo, right? 2 seconds down, 2 seconds up, or whatever we're picking. If they can do that all the way through, then we go, okay, this is a good load. Let's progress to the next one. And you just keep that criteria all the way up. The value of that can be very beneficial in terms of, for a lack of a better example, like the bone response in your body is similar to an unwatered plant. If you start to water it, it will have some growth to it. But if you flood it with water, you'll kill it. And it's the same idea here. If you overload your bones and musculature, you're going to get a lot of negative response. But if we progress this slowly and work up through this, yeah, the bone response would be a increase in bone density, number one response, and increases in the ability for the cartilage in between the discs, in between the your labrums, your rotator cuffs, your ligaments, your tendons, everything else in your body to slowly start to respond to this increases in load. And there's a valued return for that. In terms of they get stronger, they get more resilient, they increase in range of motion, they increase in stability. The spine is no different. As long as it's done appropriately, it will have a positive return. Now, are you going to heal away your issues? No, but you can definitely improve your quality of life and increase range of motion and capability and get back to maybe even doing some things that you couldn't do before. However, if it's a rather severe case, sometimes people can take quick walking steps and they get this neurological electric feeling from the stenosis down their legs, which is a severe variation of sarcopenia, of sciatica. And this can give all the way down to their feet to like a neuropathy response where they start to lose sensation in their feet, drop toe, drag toe, all these other variations that can start to come. If you're at that level and you have that severe of a case, we can improve it with resistance training, but are you going to heal that out of you? I don't think so. There are surgical procedures that some people can look at. They're expensive, they're long, they're difficult rehabs. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. Evan Osar is a very good friend of mine and a very good expert on stenosis. He's someone I would encourage you to chat with as well. And he's a genius when it comes to this stuff. He lives down in Texas right now, a very good physical therapist, athletic trainer, great guy, and he knows this topic really, really well. He and I partner with a lot of work, and he does a lot of the therapy and the bone and the joint kind of focus, and I do more of the musculature, side of things. And we've really helped a lot of people get better and improve their quality of life. But just like arthritis, you're not going to be able to get rid of it once you have it, but you can definitely improve your quality, improve your capabilities with it, as long as you do so properly.
I have to connect him to Joe Rogan, who's probably impossible to get a hold of, but Rogan's in Austin. And I wanted to connect with him because we're close in age. We're both from the East Coast. We both did comedy. We both did Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I didn't do stand-up combat very much, a little Taekwondo, but I always wanted to connect with him because my study, The Aging Athlete, I think I've interviewed more athletes, coaches than anybody on the planet since 2008. I'm over
Nice.
4,000 people now.
Oh, wow.
Not all like a recorded thing like this, but my conversations with people tend to go into the interview phase and tend to last longer than 2 minutes. If I'm at a gathering, a 2 minute will turn into 20 minutes, and if we're having a meal, it could go for 2 hours, and if we're on a bus trip, it could go as long as the bus trip. I'm one of those people who was born with a bartender's personality, and I'm actually very curious about people's thoughts. And when you get into the athletes and the coaches, they've lived these highly productive, highly busy lives with oftentimes lots of traveling, lots of challenges, lots of doing things they wish they didn't do, like Muhammad Ali getting knocked down and by the British boxer, and then Angelo Dundee cutting his glove. When you think about that kind of stuff, it's normal for sports. In my high school football, when I was a manager freshman year, I didn't play high school football until I was a junior. I was too skinny and little. But we went to one away game, and it was a pretty big game. It was to get into the sectional finals, and the other team, JFK in rural New Jersey, I think it was JFK, can't remember right now, but they watered their field in a point of rain in the winter time, and it wasn't frozen, but it was so wet. The other team put cleats in their shoes that were almost an inch long. Luckily, somebody on my team had a father who was like the manager, but he was there a few times during the week, and he was there on the weekend, and he went out and bought a bunch of cleats, and gave those to me and a couple of the other managers, and we changed all the cleats and these shoes for these extra long ones so that we weren't, ice skating out in the mud.
Talk about home field advantage there, huh?
Yeah. Have you seen the darker sides and the subterfuge of athleticism in your career, Robert?
Not so much, especially not personally. I had a couple experiences in college where I was approached for steroid use. Proud to say I've been a clean athlete my whole life in any type of competition. Not until later in my life did I start to use some testosterone replacement in the last 4 years, which is, I think, probably one of the bigger knocks that goes against Joe. You're talking about Joe Rogan a minute ago. You look at Joe and he's 62, 63 years old, somewhere around in there. And the guy is in absolutely amazing shape. He takes care of his body. He trains phenomenally well. And if you went back 20 years and you looked at the average 62, 63-year-old, you would be very hard pressed to find somebody that looked like him. And nowadays, there's a large chunk of our older adult population that maybe isn't as muscular, but just as fit and just as capable. And we're starting to see further influences of fitness into the older ages. And people will look at that and they go, well, it's because he takes testosterone. You could take testosterone and put it into anybody, and it's not going to make them look like that. You have got to do work. You have got to train. You've got to know how to train your body at that age to be able to maintain that type of muscle mass. I could shoot you up with HGH and whatever Barry Bonds was taking, like whatever anybody was taking, the best stuff. If you don't train, it's not going to do anything other than probably just make your body bloat, right? And so there's a work ethic that needs to be implemented here. And I think that's probably one of the darker myths is if you're taking an HGH, if you're taking a growth hormone, if you're taking any kind of therapy response in your body, a testosterone, a human growth hormone, if you're taking any type of therapies, that you're cheating or you're working. I don't think so. I think we're maximizing our opportunities here as we age. And especially in my case, removing a thyroid, my testosterone levels were 0 for 4 or 5 years. The fact that I was able to produce the kids that I have, I am shocked and very, very pleased, but just shocked with that low of a testosterone score. So that's been an added value in the years. This was not something you could have done 20 years ago. And now we're even seeing that therapy start to travel over with women going through menopause, postmenopausal responses, estrogen, little bits of testosterone helping them through that. Like these are the areas I would look at where if you were say, oh, this is, drug use, quote unquote. I don't think so. I think this is actually a really good value for us as we start to age and trying to help us age gracefully with healthier, stronger bodies. It'll help us live longer. The more muscle mass we have, the longer we're going to live, the better quality of life we're going to live. And these are tools that can assist us in doing that. So I think that's probably the most exposure in anything that I would kind of consider on that side. But generally speaking in fitness now, everything's been pretty healthy, pretty positive, and pretty encouraging from my point of view.
Point of clarification, Robert. Rogan is currently 57. I'm 62. And I did get to hear what Rogan's doing for his training. This video is, I believe, is very recent, and he's doing a lot of kettlebell work.
Yeah.
He does a couple of other free weight things. He does high intensity training, and he does cold plunges throughout the workout. So I would call what he does and what many people do production oriented and intensity oriented. I wouldn't call it balanced. And so here's what I'm talking about. When I hear a lot of people preaching, get it in, get it done, get it out, get out of there, get it out, get it done quick so you can get back to this very busy life. And the way I look at it, I'm a less is more type of a person. So I'm a big believer in the nature principle. A gentleman wrote a book a few years before I wrote my book, Sedentary Nation, and it's called The Nature Principle. And he's not an athlete, but he's someone who's studied how the mind works. And if you think of millions of years of upright walking entities living out in nature, there's a reason why our biochemistry and our physiology, our mood, everything responds, our posture responds to nature and to sunlight and to the change of seasons, to looking at animals, to the distractions of things, flying by or running by, all these things that are very helpful for us. So I would say for the people like Djokovic, who's the top tennis player who's ever played in terms of ability, focus, technique, and Masters wins, he's doing hyperbaric chamber. He's got a very long career. He travels all the time. Every minute is dialed into this performance and recovery. And he's also doing this great thing, this performance. I think it's valid. It's important for certain groups of people. But the other thing is to step outside and go out near trees, go out in parks, go out to the beach trails, any place you can, even if it's just a bamboo type yoga center where you're not just around rubber fluorescent lights or those other small lights that are the reset lighting with that other technology. What's that lighting called? Do you remember that, Robert?
Your LEDs light? Is that what you're talking
the
about?
LED. If you read up on LEDs, I'm a believer that they're not as helpful for you. Fluorescent, of course, not very helpful for you. Incandescent lights, old school, more helpful, but natural lighting, of course, the best. And so these are some of the things that I would encourage people like Rogan. I'm sure he is with his hunting and his travel, he's doing nature work, but that's what I say is one of the most points of contention I have with the gym workouts and the people who are trying to run a schedule that's a 15 to 16 hour day where they've got to have every minute count. I think that could be, I think it is. I think it's detrimental in terms of wellness and mind, body, and spirit. Over to Robert for his comments.
I would agree. And I think you probably only keep something like that up for so long, right? Like Djokovic isn't going to do that his entire life. I would assume when his career ends, he'll slow down and he'll still train and he'll still play tennis and, golf or something else. But I don't think he'll have to be minute by minute like he is there. Yeah, you look at Rogan, there's a great video of him and I always forget this other guy's name. Oh, I forget his name. Big guy. He's a blues singer. It's maybe a month or two old, and they're doing a kettlebell workout together. And they're doing some Indian clubs and working with maces, and they do a plunge afterwards. And it's just, they're just kind of cruising through a workout. They're doing a bunch of body weight stuff too. And Joe is just tossing around these kettlebells. And his buddy's training with one, and it's like, you look at it and you're like, he's struggling. Joe's just cranking. And if you know those weights, like Joe's working with two 71-pound kettlebells, one in each hand. And you're like, holy hell. Like that is really strong. You said he was 57. Is that what you said? Not 60 yet?
57.
57. So, that you would have respect on anyone in their 20s to be able to do dual kettlebell swings with 71 pounds in each hand and presses overhead and all that. And he does it with ease. Like you can just see this is an exceptionally strong individual. a very committed individual, someone who practices this a lot. But to your point, he plunges, he's outside all the time. He talks about grounding, sun exposure. He does all that often. He likes to bow hunt. He's a real well-rounded individual, but then spends his nights in his comedy club, doing stand-up. And then once a month flies to Vegas and commentates for the UFC. And he does all kinds of stuff. It's, there's a freedom to, I'm sure, the money that he has that allows him to live a life like that. But at the same time, there's things to learn from that for sure, that the regimented component of every minute is committed to something in our life is probably not terribly healthy for us. So it was really impressive. It's maybe 40 minutes and they follow him the whole time. He did one with The Rock as well, and they didn't go as deep into it, but they showed him working out together, doing a plunge together. It was cool. Action Bronson, that's who it is. Here it is. Yeah, look at that one. This one, it's 40 minutes long. And it's him and Action Bronson doing a workout together, and it's great. They go through all kinds of stuff. They're doing kettlebell work, and that's a 70-pound kettlebell he's heaving, and Action Bronson's got like a 50, and they're doing swings. I know you can't see that all that great, but it's a great video. They do squats and they plunge afterwards. It's really entertaining, and you get a great idea. He's got a beautiful weight room. His weight room, his first one was made by Sorinex, Bert Soren at Sorinex. They made his first weight room. I think he got a Rogue one after that. And then now with his new location and whatnot, he's got a big Sorinex facility in there with just beautiful equipment. His own kettlebell line with all the, the different ape and gorilla faces and such on there too. He's got those in there. It's a cool weight room. That's a little paradise, and would be a bucket list, do a workout. And his weight room would be fun, but with him would be even more fun. So if you get on a podcast with him and get to talk to that guy, I'll come as your security. Let me come with you. I would I would love that. I'd love to chime in. That would be great.
What I wanted to do is mention to him, I think I sent him an email when he was still accessible, like 10, 12 years ago. But, I was one of the 10,000 that day probably. But what I wanted to share with him is that this idea of my aging athlete study, I don't know if you had a chance to see what I'm up to, but I started out with a question because I met this number 4 NFL draft pick from 1966 at a gym at a tennis center up in Marin County. And that was in 2009. And it was right the week after a doctor in Santa Barbara, Bill Gallivan, told me that after I'm done with Sedentary Nation, I should write a book called The Aging Athlete, because it's a new field in orthopedic medicine. And so he's replacing parts on athletes, not just older athletes, but even 14-year-olds. So this is something that we didn't have when I grew up in the 70s and finished high school in 81. We didn't have joint replacements for any of our athletes that I knew of. I'm sure we had people with knee operations, but we didn't do joint replacements back then. So he told me to look into the aging athlete. And then a week later, I meet a guy who's a 66 at the time, and he was the 66 NFL number 3 pick. And he's an offensive lineman, which I thought was rare to be that high of a pick. But he was a multi-sport athlete in high school, and in college he did track and football at Indiana. He's from Gary, Indiana, home of the Jackson 5. And I said to him, he had mangled fingers, but he was training in the weight room. And then he played doubles tennis twice a week with my sister, who was a member of this gym up in Marin. I said, Randy, how do you do your fitness? He said, I recreate in the gym 5 days a week. Now, I hadn't heard somebody talking about recreating in the gym. And then he said, I used to play singles, but because of my knees, I can only play doubles tennis. And he's a big 6'5" guy. When I saw him, he was like around 250. And so very fit and smart and agile athlete, but just, aging process for athletes. So then I started thinking, I said, Randy, his last name is Beisler, still alive, I believe. I said, when you go to the commemorative events with the guys that you played high school, college, and pro football with, and then you go to these golf tournaments, how many of these people are still fit? And he said less than 10%. He didn't even miss a beat. less than 10%. I said, how many of these people are still practicing physical activity? He said, I said regular physical activity, like a little bit every day. He said less than 10%. So I started with that question, and now I'm up to over 4,000 people I've asked that question to. Then I multiply it. I ask them to go through the list of the 10 people from their era whom they still know about. So they're on Facebook with them, or they see them at these events. They talk to them, whatever. And that gets me up to a study that's, it's anecdotal, but it's still pretty good, 40,000 people. And the number is invariably always less than 10%. So I've had, out of those 4,000 people, I've had 6 say my group is higher than 10%. So over to Robert for his thought on that.
Bill gave me that idea, and here I am many moons later, 8 years later, and the athletes, over 1,000 people, some official interviews such as this one, some at a dinner party, at a gym where I met them. And I've asked these people, some maybe in 2 minutes, some in over the course of weeks of interviews and conversations, what about this issue of the aging athlete? What about this issue of less than 10%? And all but 2, and over 1,000 people to date, over 1,000 people, all but 2 have said, my core of people, it's less than 10%. So I want to ask Dr. Bill if he's ever heard that statistic, what he thinks about it, and what do you think is contributing to that?
I think it's probably accurate, sadly.
The findings of Sifu Slim's years of research suggest that less than 10% of retired performance athletes practice regular fitness or at least intentional daily physical movement after their sports careers. This demographic group, just like the rest of modern humans, tends to suffer the consequences of a sedentary lifestyle.
It's certainly less than 20, probably less than 10, and I'm an optimist, so less than 10% I think is pretty accurate.
Boy, I mean, I guess my initial thought would be that the athlete is put through so much stress and so much training, and they have a love for their sport, and the amount of work and effort they put in and the dedication from it, from some of these sports starting at 6, 7 years old, all the way up to 35, 40 years old, and then they stop competing. At some point, they just go, man, I just don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to put my body through it. Well, you'll see people that Eli Manning, Peyton Manning, Chris Carter, a lot of these guys on the day shows, Michael Strahan played at 275, 280, 290 some years. He's about 220 now. He looks fantastic. He's lean and cut. A lot of these guys, they really cut down. They lose all that size because they know they can't carry that forever. And they take really good care of themselves, but they're only training, 10% of what they did before. A professional or Olympic level athlete will put in between 24 and 30 hours a week of training. That's a ton. If you really think about that, that's 3 to 5 hours a day. Now, if you're an endurance athlete, you're a Lance Armstrong, these type that are on bikes or marathon runners, you're doing 3, 4, 5 hours a day. Now you're up to, 25, 35 hours a week. Like, it's just an excessive amount of training. And so, yeah, I would assume the burnout on the backside of that when they're done, people are just like, man, I've been doing this for so long and beating my body up for so long. They just stop. And it's not the right thing to do. They need to change that, right? They need to change to, like, I'm a regular person now. I just need to do kind of just some regular resistance training and some regular fitness levels. But I would just assume that that's why that number is so low, is they've done so much for so long, they get burnt out on it.
So I would say for the pro athletes, I would agree. The Olympic athletes and pro athletes, I would agree. But the people I'm asking are high school, college, and pro. And then it's also industrial athletes. So now we're talking about contractors, bus drivers, UPS lifting people,
Gotcha.
Broadway dancers, former ballet people who use their physical body in a meaningful way for a part of their career. So the numbers are the same in all those groups. So what I've come up with, and this is based on they're telling me these things, and I have to sometimes ask them the right questions to have them process this, because a lot of people who've been performance oriented even as a junior high school athlete, in my era, we were more fun oriented and well-rounded oriented back in the 70s. But along the way in the 90s, probably the younger people, you would hear 10-year-olds going to get a personal trainer, going to their chiropractor, going to physical therapy. So there was this constant barrage, besides all their homework and their limited time with their friends playing like I used to do. They've got a minute by minute schedule to be this performance 10 and 12-year-old based on the pressures of their parents, their school, and they themselves, right? So what I've come up with is that the idea of playful recreation was removed from the equation. So if you go back to me being a kid and my dad being a kid and his dad being a kid, go out and play and don't come back until dinner. This was a very common thing. Go out and play and run the neighborhood, right? And so, or the farm, or whatever these kids were doing, or don't come back until mealtime was common. So there's this joy in independent recreation from kids that was removed along the way, probably late 1980s. Then you have the idea of grandmothers being around in my generation and constantly reminding, my grandmother, when I first knew her in her 70s, later she was in her 80s when she passed away. So I knew her a little bit before that, but she was constantly reminding me of making good long-term decisions. Same with the aunts and the uncles, so that extended family was part of my youth. And our grandparents were still playful with us. I remember one of my aunts getting down and playing card games, sitting Indian style with us when she was in her 80s. So pretty agile person to be doing that. So I saw examples, model behavior of movement. I saw older people having fun and being silly, all this type of stuff. If you go to the gym, like the Nautilus came out in a big way in the 70s, and I was the first kid in my high school to drive far away to a couple of towns over to go to the Nautilus Center where they had free weights and the Nautilus equipment, the racquetball courts. And so I'm inside, but I only did that a few days a week. The rest was sports teams, hunting, playing sports with my friends in the area where I lived, all this type of stuff. So I think the more people did the inside workouts, the more they went to performance and not just this joyful recreation, laughing with our coaches instead of worrying about the performance and the coach keeping his job or her job because of the amount of victories they had and the low amount of losses. I think that's a big part, and I could go on and on about the other pieces, but I think that's a big part of what happened when I got into my 20s to young people, and then also college and pros. It got to be more performance oriented and less fun, let's say. Over to Robert.
Yeah, Sifu. Yeah, I think it was 2016. I don't remember the exact year, but the NSCA, specifically a committee they have there called the LTAD, the Long-Term Athletic Development Group, they looked at the initial 32 first-round draft picks of the NFL and how many of them were multi-sport athletes. And they followed them over the next 8 years or 10 years, coming up on 10 years now, to see injury rates and to see levels of success. And the ones that were multi-sport athletes have been much more successful than those that had a specialty. And the ones that had specialties experienced injuries, even career-ending injuries earlier in their careers than the ones that were multi-sport athletes. Really kind of driving, and again, this is, we're only talking about 32 people, but kind of the highest level of athlete you're going to have playing one of the most difficult sports. And they would do wrestling, and they would do basketball, and they would play football, or they would do track, and they would do volleyball, and they would do football. And so they had multiple sports, different disciplines, different times in their seasons where they had to be in different shape levels and different abilities. And it carried into their a more resilient body, a less injury-prone body, and a more successful dynamic body for this sport as they aged. I think the development of Tiger Woods was a very big driver in adults seeing their kid go, man, he was a badass little expert kid on the, whatever it was, the Tonight Show or whatever, putting at 3 years old, hitting a ball 100 yards at 3 years old, and then becoming the successful athlete he was, where these parents went, we've got to specialize with our kids. And the coaches just followed suit. Well, if I'm going to have to specialize with this kid, I want to work with them year round. So now I'm securing more work for myself as a specialist. We see it from the high school level. If you're going to play softball or baseball, you've got summer leagues, you've got fall leagues now, you've got off season, preseason, in season. Like the high school season isn't even the primary one. It's the travel team is the expensive one and the primary one. And now you're in baseball year round. You can't play another sport. Well, it's number one, the demand of the parents. Number two, this coach wants to be able to coach year round, and he used to be the geometry teacher, right? And also coach. Well, now they're a full-time coach, and this is how they make their money. So really, it's just the demand of the sport, the pressure from parents, the expertise of the coaching we've had. It's really created this perfect mixture of the specialized athlete, and I think we saw a really high injury rate and burnout rate at a young age early on, and that's redirected now into encouraging kids to play multiple sports, to not specialize until later on in their careers, maybe even into college, and say, okay, I'm a football player, or now I'm a track athlete, right? And in high school is having fun and playing sport and being successful. And I think that carries and goes a long way, and the research would support that.
You have to run, and I'm wondering if we could jump on a call and do sarcopenia at another appointment.
Absolutely. That's my sweet spot. So yeah, I'd be happy to do that.
So let's do that, Robert. I appreciate it. You go. I'm going to keep blabbing because I want to say something about Tiger Woods, because he's someone I've studied for quite a long time, and I'd love to interview.
You got it, my man.
You want to give us your website, Robert?
Yeah, trainingtheolderadult.com. Feel free to pop over there. And we're also on Instagram. My name, Robert Linkul, on Instagram and on YouTube as well. So you can check any of our videos out there, any of our content. Happy to help.
Wonderful, Robert. It's been great connecting with you, and I'll send you an email. We'll connect again for our next part.
Sounds good. Thank you for having me. Appreciate
Aloha,
you.
brother. Take care.
Take care.
All right, folks. So give us a thumbs up, please. Give us a like, and let us know down below what your comments are in a respectful way. You'd be silly, but always be respectful. Wanted to say something about the question I would like to ask Tiger Woods. So I know that his training was excessive, and there's no doubt about that. Before he had his car crash, he had at least 12 surgeries on knees, on back, just on and on with different problems that he had. So big, strong guy, a wide set of shoulders. Imagine the torque on your knee when you twist all of that powerful stuff through your left knee. And it has to resist that position and stabilize the weight of that body, all of that torque, and the joint itself. So he had way too much pressure. If you look up sports science and Tiger Woods knee, if you look at that, they'll show you how many hundreds of pounds or per square inch of pressure he's putting on. It might even be over 1,000 pounds per square inch on his left knee in this video. And if I can find the video, I'll put a link down below this one. And that's just his knee. Now imagine all the rest. So the question I would ask Tiger, now he's in his 50s, I would say, Tiger, if you had to go back to your training days and instead of hitting buckets of balls for 4 hours a day, if you could drop it down to 1 hour a day, and you could still have performance that's only reduced for your peak years by 10%, would you do that? Would you go back so that you could, and on the flip side is you'd maintain your joint health, you'd maintain your spine health, et cetera. Would you do that? And here what he'd have to say, let him put that the thinking on about that. I would guess that he would say, yes, he would have changed that, because now he's a disabled person in his 50s who I don't think he can beat his son. And he certainly can't train. And to be at his level, there was a lot of training, but there's smart training. So one of the smart training modalities that I use, and I've always used this, is hit more short game shots and get your groove on with your chipping, your putting, your wedge game, etc. And don't do all of the full swings or even three-quarter swings of hitting those highly impactful shots with the big moves through the ball. So that's what I would do. And I've used that to success in getting my connection with golf and getting my mind connected to my body and feel and follow through and everything about that swing, the hinging, etc.
Don't just go for the pin on the practice range. Go somewhere else so you get your brain programmed for things that are different. You want to have different shots because that's what you have on the course. Every shot on the course is different. There's number one. A little bit farther.
Do that and see what you get. And I would advise you young golfers and you not so young golfers to consider doing that. And then take that over to tennis or any sport that you're in and do lighter training to get the feel of the thing. And don't do the heavy impact stuff and the heavy torque stuff, the heavy weighted, impactful stuff on your body because it's just too hard. And you want to have a good long life and you want to be functional. So there it is from Sifu Slim. Hope you're doing well. Wishing you all the best in your health, happiness, and wellness. And we'll talk to you in the next video. Aloha.